Hello, everyone, and welcome to Delightful Dissent. It's episode 74 today, and we have Lauren Hughes, who is a founder of Affinity Women's Business Community, joining us. So, welcome to the show, Lauren. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I cannot wait to have this conversation with you.
Oh, no, it's great. I'm really happy to have you on the show, and we're going to be talking about the idea that it's a sign today, and that's like, I do kind of have a sense that I interpret signs differently to a lot of people. They mean different things to me, and sometimes completely different things. And perhaps, and also I've also been on the receiving end of some really unhelpful labels, and people's, the signs that other people have read from me has definitely been things that have not been helpful. And I feel like as a society, we over rely on some signs and we kind of ignore others, and that's not necessarily a healthy thing. So yeah, that's definitely a really interesting thing to kind of get into today. So, yeah, if you happen to be new to the show, Delightful Dissent is a shared exploration of an idea that people often take for granted, that kind of, can go below what we think about. And it came up through my work, really talking to people taking these different approaches to really interesting, complex problems and spaces. And Lauren's absolutely one of these people. And I found doing this work, it was like you kind of trip over these hidden assumptions. And so the show's about surfacing those and exploring those and seeing how true they are. So I really hope it gives you some specific ideas about, how that can help you in your personal and professional life. But perhaps more importantly, I hope that it can give you some ideas about how you can go out there and challenge assumptions yourself, because I think that's something that everyone should be allowed and able to do. And the world would be a better place if we could. The show is called Delightful Dissent because, yeah, we are kind of, maybe disagreeing with the prevailing view a little bit. But it's not about changing people's minds as much as it is about exploring and seeing other possibilities and having some fun whilst we do it. The show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if there are any issues, technical issues. There even were before we got started, so it's entirely possible that no one on LinkedIn can see us right now, because LinkedIn was being weird. So if you are there, great. Yeah, but otherwise we'll upload a video later. Yeah, so please do bear with us if there are any technical issues. Please be aware that there may be strong language if that's an issue for you. And please also be aware that we may be talking about some difficult topics today. And the likely difficult topics are around the area of lack of control, labels and being labeled, not being listened to, and potentially around suicidality as well. So if any of those are an issue for you, then please just know that they might be coming up, and take whatever steps you need to deal with that. So yeah, there aren't any perfect answers here. It's really about exploring and asking questions. So if you're watching live, then please do, ask us questions in the comments and I will try and bring them into the conversation. If you're watching or listening to the recording, then please do get in touch with us and we'll be sharing the details to continue that conversation at the end of the show. So yeah, we first met. I think it was Emsray Searle, who was a guest back on episode 70, who introduced us, and we had an initial conversation, and I particularly kind of loved your energy and enthusiasm particularly for kind of getting on with stuff in a positive, fun way. There's something about just yeah. So I really grateful to. It's really great you could join us and have you on the show. So thank you for joining us, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me. I do just have that get on with stuff energy. It's like, it's fine, we'll figure it out,
Yeah, it's great. And yeah, and could you maybe describe your work and the people you like to work with a bit, please?
Absolutely. So the first thing I want to say, though, is just to come back to the very first thing you said, which just made me chuckle inside, because you said about reading signs, and you said you think that sometimes you read signs differently to other people. And I was like, I could literally sum up this whole podcast right now in one sentence to say that don't we all? Because it's the whole point of it is that we find our own significance in things. And I just love that you said that, because I think that instantly just gave everybody else who's listening permission to go, oh, well, so do I. And I think that's really beautiful.
Oh,
So in terms of who I am and what I do, I started life as a wedding photographer many, many years ago, moved very quickly into brand photography and videography, working very specifically with women who essentially wanted to save the world, because I'm one of those women. That's my big dream goal, save the world. But essentially it's about really working with people in community now. So I've created this beautiful, loving, spiritual, conscious community of women business owners who have this same vision to just to create change in the world, really positive change. And the common thread that comes into it in all of our work, when we talk about purpose, is conscious living. It's about reconnection with self. It's about self-trust, self-awareness, and then taking those steps to become the fullest version of you. Because truthfully, we can only really start to contribute to the whole if we have the capacity to do that, which requires a lot of inner healing, and it does require that level of consciousness. So the community that I run, and I can't stop smiling talking about it, I have so much love for these women. It's incredible. It's called Affinity, and it's a space really for women business owners, female leaders, founders, entrepreneurs, however you want to describe yourself, to come and to explore yourself, to be all that you are, to find your fullest, truest you, so that you can show up in your life in that way. And then, of course, you get this natural ripple effect when you radiate that kind of confidence and self-love out to the world around you. People can't help but get caught up in that and feel it too. And it's just magic.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, for me, right, creating my own community around my work has been so transformative, and partly because, you know, I needed that community and it didn't exist. And I think that's such a big part of it for me.
Exactly that. And I think so many of us struggle with that. I mean, human beings, when we get right down to the primal stuff, we're herd animals at the end of the day. We need other humans. We do. Even, people who see themselves as isolated sort of introverts, I still think that we still need something from other humans, for not necessarily for anything other than personal growth, opportunity to have conversations so that we can expand our perspectives. I think that the human race thrives when we communicate well with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such value in creating spaces where we can do that in a mode that works for us and enables a certain sort of communication, where that might not have been okay in other places, where that wasn't, for whatever reason, didn't happen or wasn't allowed.
Absolutely. And I think so many of us grow up in households where that is the case, where we're not allowed to be a certain way. There are expectations placed upon us to be a certain way, and then we go out into the world and we carry that on. And I think it's so many of us are sort of walking around as this strange version of ourselves that isn't anything near to being our true selves. And it's why depression and mental health issues are rife now, because we're essentially kind of shoehorned into a certain life path, a certain trajectory, being a certain way, certain behaviors that just are not aligned with who we really are. And essentially, we sort of go through life with a mask on. And actually, when you discover a community where you can take the mask off and just be, oh, it's liberating.
Yeah, it's such a relief, and almost, it's almost a shock, actually, for me sometimes. I still struggle with it sometimes. It's so deeply ingrained to be masked and to be careful and to be monitoring all the time. It's actually slightly weird to spend time with people and then look back and be like, oh, I wasn't doing that. It's like there's almost a fear of like, oh God, what did I say? I
Right.
was self-monitoring.
Yeah, it's that familiarity of being a certain way, isn't it? We get sort of programmed into certain behaviors. I mean, I noticed something about myself recently. So I'm quite good at having listening to my internal dialogue and seeing what's going on. So I noticed that I let go of a huge belief that I had in January this year, which was about over delivery, which came from a place of needing to feel valued on some deep sort of injured child kind of level because of my childhood. So I was massively over delivering, and it actually was really destructive to my business, and it wasn't serving anybody because people felt massively overwhelmed by the amount that I was giving them. So I did the whole like 5 levels of why. I was like, why am I over delivering? Okay, because I want my business to be valuable. Oh, wait a sec. It's not. No. It's because I want to feel valuable. There it is. And then why do I want to feel valuable? Because I needed to be valuable in my family, because we had a very difficult childhood with my father was very mentally ill. He probably had undiagnosed bipolar in hindsight. Took his own life when I was 24, and many attempts before that. So I felt invisible as a child. I felt unimportant. And my way to feel valuable was to help. It was to be really helpful, to try and make people feel better, to support people, even at like the age of 5. And in a household of people who struggled with their own mental well-being, that was really difficult to do. It was an impossible task, especially for a 5-year-old. So I went into this sort of overdrive of over delivery. But as soon as I noticed it and I realized where it came from, I let go of it. But what I realized afterwards is that my behaviors still carried on. Even though the beliefs had been updated, we still carry on those behaviors for a while afterwards, because that's just, it's habit, right? It's just how we've always been. So it makes perfect sense that it feels almost a bit like it's like so comfortable, but uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, community has been such a useful space for exploring the edges of that, and finding. I think relating to the to today's idea about it being a sign is one of the big things for my community is like when you don't fit well into boxes, when you're something and something else, or you're kind of none of the above. And that not fitting into the categories and the model, or like, when someone says, okay, so there's this one thing, and so you're that. It's like, you know, well, kind of. And interestingly, we had this conversation just before we went on air about like what I do. And it's like, well, it isn't a short answer. At least it's a short sentence if I'm really focused, but that doesn't say that much. And that, like, there's something about that, that having to fit into other people's boxes and around other people's needs for how the world is, and not being able to fully express ourselves in all of the kind of apparently contradictoriness or the weirdness or the the things that aren't supposed to go together. That for me particularly is, but being in a community of other people exploring that has been incredibly helpful. So yeah.
So here's a question. What if we couldn't stop other people putting us in boxes, so we just let them, but we didn't have to assign ourselves to those same boxes? What does that look like?
I mean, I think it works up until the point that we end up with practical difficulties with how we interact with the rest of the world, and people, we're always engaging. We're always taking we do need to read signs. We do need to take, summary, like something about someone, and so we engage with people differently. Like we engage with a small child differently to how we engage with an adult. There are differences in how that works, and we're reading signs to do that. I think for me, it's if we completely ignore it, we step outside, we actually, on my own experiences, we don't have access to then a lot of the kind of machinery of the world, the bureaucracy, and the you almost become like an outlaw in the literal sense. It's like, it's not, outlaws weren't breaking the law, they were said to be outside of the law. It's like all of the rules don't work. And it also means you don't have the protection of the law.
Right.
And so you don't have access to things if you don't, to some degree, meet people with their understanding of the world as well. And that is always kind of a negotiation, particularly if we have an unexpected or an unconventional aspect of our identity in some way.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right when you're talking about the sort of like the macro view of it and society and how things work within society and access to certain things, definitely. But I think on an individual level, I'm very much about sort of meeting people where they're at, right? So if somebody needs to understand me by putting labels on me, then that's how they need to understand me, and it doesn't affect me or my day-to-day life or anything. And I mean, luckily I've surrounded myself with people that tend not to be those kind of people, and this is, coming back to the community thing. But I think that some people, they sort of feel like they need to do that to understand. And I think that every single one of us, it doesn't matter how open-minded, how open-hearted we are, every single one of us has a limited perspective, right? It's limited by the information that we have received, that we've been able to process, the information that's been given to us, the information that we've gone out and found. Like, whoever we are, we have a limited perspective. And it's always possible to expand that with more information. But I mean, some people are a little bit resistant to that, and they like their perspective, and that's how they want it to stay, and that's how everybody should think.
Don't touch the perspective. It's just don't break it.
From the perspective. So there are certainly people like that in the world, and I think, I mean, my view on it is that I don't feel like I've ever been hindered by the fact that I'm a woman, for example. So I wouldn't say that I was, an outraged feminist. I wouldn't describe myself that way. I don't feel like I've been limited by anybody else's labels. I mean, I'm very privileged in that I'm a white person to begin with. So I realize that I have massive privilege just there in itself. But for me, I don't feel like I've been limited by any boxes that other people have put me in, because I'll just blaze my own trail. Like, I'm doing it anyway, right? Like, I'm not going to let what you think about me stop me from doing the thing that I know feels right in my soul. But that's me, right? And not everybody has that perspective. And I think that it's really important to meet people where they're at, and to, yes, challenge, which is what, this podcast is all about. Let's challenge those perspectives. If those people are open to expanding their perspectives, then that's fantastic. Let's talk to those people. Let's meet those people where they're at. Let's not discount them because they've got a limited view of the world based on the information they've had.
Yeah, I completely agree on the idea of, we do all have, we can only know what we know. And one of the interesting things about having a really high degree of privilege is you never encounter the edges of your perspective. Exactly. That's almost, it becomes, so it's very hard to blame people on some level. But the other side of that is working with our own, where we don't fit, and where, it's almost like a design question. It's like the world is not designed for us, where it doesn't fit, because we're not the, it, and it's that and I think for me, it's not a problem being able to adapt. I think that's a really helpful thing. To be able to work with other people's perspective is an incredibly helpful thing. But in my own experience, in my own life, and actually with a lot of other neurodivergent people, particularly with the high camouflaging, high masking neurodivergent people, it's getting stuck in other people's perspectives, is not actually being ever really having had the opportunity to cultivate our own fully. And one of the really big advantages, I think, of being with other people who have these different perspectives and the range of perspectives is actually simply to be able to then use that to develop our own understanding and our own perspective and our own way of expressing it. Because that's the other side, it's like we want to see something tells us, but we also want to act on that somehow. And sometimes I think we might perceive the things, but we've never been given the opportunity to develop that as it, because it's not what people expect. It doesn't fit with the existing models. And so I think and that's not to say there isn't significant privilege in the fact that you have the space to do that, actually, because there's always intersectionality. But yeah, so I think there's something that experience of being in a space where you don't have that is definitely really wonderful and healthy. I think for me, I don't experience the world, the most of the world, as being that way, though.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, I've done a lot of work to get to this point. I mean, I didn't always feel this way. I look back on it now, and I certainly had to do a lot of work around particularly challenging, situations that I've been through. And I think for me it all starts with the self, because I think the more we put outside of ourselves in terms of blame, like blaming people for not accepting us the way we are, blaming people for putting us in boxes, the more we do that, the more we give our power away. And I'm open to having my perspective shifted on this, by the way. So from where I'm at the moment, from my experiences, I mean, I'm 40 now. I've done a lot of counseling, therapy, EMDR, spiritual work, lots of different modalities to explore myself. And I've come to a place of realizing that ultimately what I needed was to look inside, to do the healing work that I needed to do, to release my traumas, to let go of beliefs that didn't serve me, to come to a place where I felt full of myself. Because I think that when you get to that place, then you're less, and I don't mean for this to sound patronizing to anybody who's listening, but I just, from my personal experience, that's all I'm talking about. I feel like I'm just less affected by what other people think, do, feel, say, how they behave. I'm less affected by it because I realize that what they've got going on is their own personal journey. They've got their own healing work to do. They've got their own perspective expansion to do. Every single one of us is on our own unique journey. But what I do know for certain is that, as I said at the beginning, when you get to that place of feeling whole, you have so much more capacity to contribute to a greater good, to give outside of yourself, to build communities, to support those people to do the same thing, to shift other people's perspectives, because you're not triggered by them, because you're not responding to them in a way that is deeply emotional and painful because the healing work hasn't yet been done. So you can meet them where they're at with love and compassion, even if they're being a shitbag. You can meet them there, and instead of calling them out on their shit, you can call them in, which is a beautiful phrase that came from a fabulous book that I'm reading at the moment called The Persuaders by Anand Giridharadas. And it's just got the most beautiful approach to shifting perspectives. And they talk about calling people in. So even people who have deeply opposing views to them, they, instead of calling them out and shaming them, they call them in and they bring them into a conversation that is more open. Unfortunately, it does mean you being the bigger person every time. So you're holding space for them. But ultimately, if we want to change the world, if we want to create that kind of powerful change, for me personally, with the way that the way that I'm made up, that feels good to me. That ability to hold that space for somebody to expand into, that feels magic to me.
I think there's a real yes and for me there.
Yeah.
I agree in the value of that, but I also feel that it's easy to lose one's own view in others if your perspective on the world is relatively rare, relatively unique, for a number of reasons. So it's the holding one's own perspective at the same time as other people's. And the majority approach to this is just to hold on to my own perspective and not consider anyone else's. But a lot of the people I work with, and actually my own experiences, I lose myself in other people's experiencing of the world. So,
what does
sorry?
that look like?
It means one way I can describe this is like, it's almost like cognitive hypermobility. It's like you can stretch beyond what's healthy for you.
Right.
and that itself is like, I'm so like, I needed to learn perspective taking very early on, to get by for multiple reasons, and it's so ingrained that I'll take someone else's perspective at my own expense.
Right.
So it's that's the kind of the other side of this, because there's a balance, there's an intersection point here, and I think, that idea of like trusting someone else's signifiers over one's own, that's and I think understanding where you are on that, there's two extremes, right? There's I have one perspective and I see, and then there's I don't really trust my own, I trust everyone else's. And that's and actually what you want is a balance, an intersection between those.
So when can I ask a question about that, because I'm interested, because it's not something I've experienced before. But when you so you obviously notice that it's something that you do, that you take on people's perspectives. Do you notice it in the moment? Is it a choice? That's a good question, isn't it?
It's mostly a choice now. The work I've done is on unpicking a lot of this stuff, but it has been a defense mechanism for a lot of my life, and so some of it is very deeply woven and automatic. So the more I've been working on my own self-understanding, the more I can spot it and choose to use it or not. And I think it's that choice that's the really important part. It's not a bad thing at all. It can be a really helpful thing, but it can also be overdone. And I think that, that in this whole space, like how we're relating to what we are when we're seeing things, we're taking a few things and we're assuming a lot on that basis, and we have to do that. That's how brains work. Anyone who tells you they aren't making assumptions is just unaware that they're making assumptions. That's like, you have to be making assumptions. And if you can't interrogate them, you can't actually know whether they're helpful assumptions or not.
That's how I like to make friends. I like to interrogate them first. Like bright light in their face. You will answer the question.
Exactly. I'll just say something that kind of weirds people out, and if they're still interested in being like, but I can't help it. It's not deliberate. It's just like, there's something about getting that out there and that being on the surface. And I think this is a really important part of this. You can over camouflage, and it can stop you finding the right people. And because it's like, I realized this a while back, actually, through with my approach to marketing, and thinking like, I used to really, really struggle with stuff, because it was like, I was like, how, because I was working on the wrong assumption. Basically, I was working on the assumption that marketing was about making people like me, or making people want to work with me. And actually, what I realized was, all I was doing was I was helping people to a decision about whether or not they wanted to work with me, instead of it being like trying to convince someone. I'm just giving you everything you need to make your own decision, which also means that there would be some people like engaging with my stuff being like, hell no, and that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. And I think that idea of like being able to show on the surface and read in others that stuff is a really good thing. And I've also got much better at spotting it in other people, about knowing like early on when someone's, and I think it's actually it's a process thing. It's like it's quick, but it's definitely interactive in terms of that working out if there's fit or not. And it's definitely got better, and that's true socially too. I ended big friendships around when I kind of really started developing some of this stuff, not deliberately, but it just happened. And in hindsight, it's like that kind of needed to happen.
Yeah. Because essentially you become I think that our life experiences create a version of us that we get put on a trajectory in life, a path that we are placed upon based on our life experiences. I had a pivotal moment actually when I was 15, and I was sat on the swings in the park by myself, and in that moment I felt so invisible. I felt so unimportant in my life that if I was to just disappear, that nobody would even notice. That was my belief in that moment. And I sort of looked ahead at my life and I thought, it's so sad. My life looks so sad from here. It looks lonely and unconfident and unsuccessful and unhappy. And I just, in that moment, I was like, but I don't want that. I don't want that to be my life. So I stepped out. In that moment, I stepped out of the trajectory that my life had placed me on. And coming back to what you said about choice earlier, the truth is we always have a choice. And that's a really heavy thing for me to say, because I think about, people in like deeply traumatic situations that they have, found themselves in because of the life path that they've been placed on, women who suffer domestic violence and are literally fear for their lives every day, and children that grow up in really difficult homes, these kind of situations. But as we get older, we do have a choice that we can choose a different path. We can. And I love the book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, that I've mentioned to you before, where Clarissa Pinkston Estes talks about this element of choice. And what she says, and this is why I would come back to like reconnecting with self, because she essentially says that when you are not reconnected or not connected with your instinctual, natural, deep, true self, you think you only have one choice, and you don't even realize you have that choice. You think you have one path to walk, and that's it. There's no conscious awareness. You just do. You just comply with the life you've been placed upon. But when you are connected with self, you realize you have at least three choices. So the first one is that compliance route, just going along with whatever society's told you to do, whatever your family told you to do, all the expectations that you've got on you, becoming this weird sort of shell of a person that is so far removed from the real you. It's unreal. You don't know how to be in situations. You don't know how to show up. You don't trust your own judgment. You don't trust your own perspective. You take on other people's perspectives, and then you've got the opposite of that, which is rebellion, which doesn't serve you either, because essentially you're still being influenced by the same shit that put you on this path,
Yeah.
but you're fighting against it. So it's even more exhausting.
It's kind of equal. It's like, and it also makes you equally and oppositely wrong.
Yeah.
It's like all of the things that are wrong with that perspective. Like it's what's the word? Yeah, an intaglio. It's the opposite of the.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the equal opposite, isn't it? Basically, so it's the same thing, but possibly worse actually, because you're tiring yourself out. You've got like, you're sort of fueled by anger and resentment, and you've got that energy carried around with you all the time. And then you've got, of course, the middle ground. It's not even the middle ground, because it's the path. It's your path. It's the one that you get to choose. It's the one where you serve yourself. You take away all of the expectations and the conditioning, and you only get to choose that path when you are connected with yourself. When you consciously wake up to yourself. You consciously realize that you have choices to make in life. That you don't have to go along with the conditioning of your life experiences. That you can peel those layers. But I'm not saying it's easy. Like, I mean, the way I'm saying this is if I just did it overnight. I mean, it took me 20 years to get to this point. Like, it can, but I now share my experiences to help other people get there quicker, because it's honestly, it's the best gift you can give yourself, is to give yourself your agency back over your own life, your own choices, your own decisions, your own behaviors. And you become aware of all the things that you're doing, and you can notice when things are out of alignment with you. And I do a lot of work now around like really consciously connecting with myself. So I do conscious dance, for example, which for me is the best way, because I'm quite cerebral. Like, I like the science. I like to understand things. I rationalize things. I think my way through things, or I used to. But now with the conscious dance, I've been able to drop into my body, and I actually listen to my body wisdom now, which to people who probably have never experienced. If somebody said that to me 2 years ago, I would have been like, what? What? But now I feel it. And I honestly, you could ask me a question and I would feel the answer in my body, and I would know if it was a yes or a no straight away. And I would trust that 100%.
I think, really connecting with that. And one of the things for me is when we do experience the world differently for whatever reason, it's very, very easy to pick up the message that we are experiencing it wrong.
Ooh.
That our perception, our reading of the situation and what's good for us even is wrong, because it doesn't fit. Because when we say to someone, oh, that doesn't, it's like, and someone says why, and you have to give an explanation, it doesn't map to what other people can understand. And so you don't get given it's either assumed that you're saying it for some other reason, or that there's some external motivation. And I think that difference in perception is a really important, for me, it's one of the most important things for, is that value of community and of society. That's what makes humans really good at, like, successful, is the fact that we see things differently and we can talk about it and we can benefit from those different perspectives. But what happens if we get this overwhelming other perspective on our experience, we can never make sense of it. We can never have that, and that's a difficult thing to develop. And if you have a very conventional perspective, I think you kind of, probably to a greater or lesser extent, like, the developmental options available to you, if you've had relatively conventional experiences and you started with a relatively conventional neurology and all of this stuff, that's all, it kind of lines up, like, how you think and how the models are thinking models and how you feel, to a greater or lesser extent. It's always but if you're at the edges of this, if you have experienced things that not many other people have, if you feel differently about the world, if you experience the world differently, those things don't always line up, and that tension between the thinking and the feeling, the head and the body, is a really scary thing. And in my experience, people respond to that often respond to that one of two ways. Is they'll either just be in the body and they won't think, or they'll just get stuck in the head and they won't get into the body. And so you land in one. And for me, the really interesting thing about the signs, particularly the signs that we sense, that we perceive, is, like, the point is not that, like, the perception is better than the thinking, is that they're complementary. We should be using both. And it's getting stuck in one that's the real, and getting stuck, and also denying our own what's coherent for us in that.
I think for me, it's I'm aware that I'm sort of suddenly becoming aware that my perspective seems very conventional. It hasn't always been this way, because I've been through quite serious traumas with my dad's suicide and my mum's mental health, and having to be a parent far too young, and lots of other things that I could go into, but we'd be here for a long time. And my perception hasn't always been this. My beliefs haven't always been this, put it that way. So 2-3 years ago, like I said, I wouldn't have been able to say any of this stuff. It wouldn't have made any sense to me whatsoever. But something that I do know is that every single one of us experiences the world differently, and then other people have extra stuff on top of that makes it even more complex. And I think that, for me, I think that the root of it is about trusting self. It's about knowing worth. It's about knowing that your thoughts, your opinions, your beliefs, they're all valid, right? They're not always right. My beliefs that I had 5-6 years ago they have been updated since then, right? So we are not trees rooted to the ground, never able to move. We have this amazing ability to be quite fluid and expansive if we want to be. But my beliefs back in the day would have been very different to what they are now. And I think that it is about bringing it home to self and knowing your own worth, knowing your own value, understand. So this was what happened when I was 15. I think essentially I stopped seeing myself as an extension of my parents. And I decided that I wanted to be something other than what was laid out for me. That was if I summed it up, that would be the best way to sum it up. And I realized that I had my own value just by myself because I existed, regardless of anybody else. And like I said, it took a long time to get to this place of radical, deep self-acceptance, which is a wonderful place to be in. I shared a conversation the other day with one of the ladies in my group, and she said, like, how do you get there? What does that even feel like? How nice is it to just love yourself completely? I was like, oh, it's not that. That's not the same as radical, deep self-acceptance. For me, radical, deep self-acceptance is about acknowledging all that you are. It's about like understanding that you're flawed. We're all fundamentally flawed, right? We've all got stuff that we would rather not have, that we would like to change. But it's about acknowledging that stuff with love and kindness and curiosity and exploring it rather than judging yourself or beating yourself. You know, the self-flagellation that goes on for people on a daily basis it must be exhausting, right? It was for me when I was doing it. So it's about coming to this place of knowing yourself, like deeply knowing yourself and understanding that your perspective on the world has value. And I say this with love because, like I said, I was there. Sometimes we are wrong. Sometimes our perspective is wrong. And I will say that because ultimately it's wrong because of the conditioning we've received. It's wrong because of the expectations that we have on us. It's wrong because of all of this external stuff. And we put so much stock in all of this going on out of here and very little stock in here. Like we're so busy being distracted by all the things going on outside of ourselves that we're not looking within for the answers.
Yeah, I think that I definitely agree on that. The turn within and to start listening to that voice is incredibly helpful and incredibly healing. And actually, I think the other side of this is it's not to say if you see the world differently, there's nothing you can do.
Oh, yeah, that exactly.
You know, it's not to say then just give up. What it is, though, is connecting with that actually gives you a really clear steer on what matters to be done. You know, it points out where you can make a meaningful change, where you can address this stuff, where you can do stuff that's going to serve you and your values and what you want. You know, and I think that's the other side of this. So there's an interesting model of you know, I've always had a very kind of shaky relationship with the idea of self-confidence, because on one level I've always been extremely self-confident, on the other not at all. And I came across a model dividing it into self-competence and self-worth. So I have very high self-competence, but I actually have pretty low self-worth. And I think that relationship is often the thing. So it's like where that leads is we end up doing things for other people. We follow other people's perception. We follow other people's needs, and we turn our skills to that. And then we don't get the outcomes that matter to us. You know, so I think there's a huge, this isn't about like giving up for me. It's actually, but it is also really important to acknowledge that those things exist, you know, these challenges exist, and that is the work that we can then engage with, you know, and I think that's there's a because it often feels like we can either ignore those things and, you know, be almost, yeah, that therein lies toxic positivity, honestly, you know, and stuff that isn't grounded and doesn't, you know, can be difficult, can make promises that we can't fulfill, and we can end up chasing the promises that we make, if we go that far, and I see that in leaders in particular, in all sorts of domains. It's a really dangerous place to go psychologically, because it's unmeetable, and like you said, we're all flawed, we're all human, we can't be perfect and do everything. But the other side of it is inaction and getting stuck and not being able to act at all. And I think for me, that, like, how are we working with our perception, and how are we engaging with other people, so we can, we can share. It's a shared thing. It's a developed thing over time. That for me is a different way of, of working with it, I think. But yeah.
I love that approach. So, I mean, I'm all about connection and growth through conversation. I'm an external processor, so I love to say things out loud. I love to be challenged. I love it when people ask me a question that makes me go, "Ooh, that's my favorite response to a thing." Because I don't want to just have the answer immediately. I want somebody to ask me a question that makes me go, like, drop within and have a really good chat with myself in there to figure out, what is it we really feel about that? Like, is there resistance there? What is that resistance? Because sometimes it comes because it's something that's out of alignment with us. Sometimes it comes because it's something we're afraid of. Like, there's different kinds of resistance. But having those internal conversations that are, often triggered by external conversations, is that for me is my lifeline. That's the reason why I am who I am now, because I've had those really hard conversations with other people and with myself. So I did do a lot of like cerebral processing before I came to the sort of spirituality world. But for me, spirituality is just like deep connection with self. That's what spirituality means to me. And with source. But I think that the conversations that we have with other people are such a gift, with the right people. Now that's the key, isn't it? Having conversations with the right people. If you have a conversation with somebody who might be the wrong person, who is there a wrong person? Now there's a question. Possibly, actually, conversations with the wrong people can be really beneficial for us as well, as long as we're approaching it from that strong perspective of, I know myself. And if you say something that doesn't feel in alignment with me, I'm going to feel that. I'm going to know. I'm going to, or if you're going to trigger me, that's fine. I can have a look at my triggers. Like, I'm a big fan of triggers. I think that triggers are a fantastic opportunity for growth. And so I think that, like, the biggest expansion often comes from the biggest pain as well. And if we are walking around with unhealed trauma, with pain that we're carrying around with us, then we are essentially living a half-life. I firmly believe that, from my own perspective. I'm not going to speak for everybody else, but from my own perspective, I was living a half-life. It wasn't my truest self. I wasn't doing things that really served me. I was all out of alignment. I was unhappy. I had bouts of like deep depression, and I really struggled in life, and then when I came to this place of, the deep self-acceptance, things started to shift for me. And it's all about really coming home to self. Have I labored that point enough now?
So if someone, when you say, I think one of the really interesting things around this is there are different pathways to doing this. And for me, I relate to it is that my work is part of this, but I also see it as an ongoing process. I don't think it's ever going to be finished.
No, there's
Actually,
no there.
I think that's it's a trajectory thing. So I think, sometimes the language around this I find quite tricky, because it sounds like it's like an achievement or a thing, whereas for me it's much more like, okay, it's a direction, and that direction feels good.
Nice. Yeah, no, I like that. That feels really good to me as well. I do realize that I talk about this in quite finite terms. I fully believe that there is no there. There's nowhere that we're trying to get to, because I believe that we are on a constant journey of growth and expansion and learning and unlearning. And and at some point, maybe in 3 years' time, you might have a different conversation with me, and I've you're meeting me where I'm at right now. With the learnings that I've had to this point. And I think that's the same with all of us. We all have this potential to grow. So yeah.
Yeah, and we can always respond differently the next time. And I think for me, a lot of the question about I don't like right or wrong because it doesn't. I don't find it very meaningful. In it's like without for me, it's like what's fun, what's helpful. They're more useful questions than right or wrong, because that again is like looking for external signs, looking for external validation.
Yeah.
you know you're reaching for it for something outside of your way of looking at the world, whereas for me, reconnecting with that experiencing, and searching for that, and edging, it can be really weird, so edging into it is actually, it's like you don't need to overwhelm yourself with it. Just do a bit of whatever feels fun and
Yeah.
whatever feels helpful, and also, allowing yourself, there's a trust thing and a self trust but trust builds over time as well.
Mm.
you know so if you've been taught by, whatever experiences you've had, that you shouldn't trust yourself for a significant chunk of your life, it's going to take a while to unpick that,
Well,
particularly if that is still available that message is still there in the outside world.
I mean, just think about society in general. We are taught from a young age to not trust ourselves. We look
Mm,
to our parents, we look to our teachers, we look to the government, we look to society, we look to, these authority figures in our lives that have the answer. And we're not, we're not taught to trust our intuition. We're not taught to look within from a young age. So of course it's a difficult thing to start to practice. But I think that the very first step towards it is self-awareness, isn't it? It's looking at self. And the key, as I said, is to not do that with self-judgment, because that's exhausting. I mean, like, I spent years and years doing that. And it is exhausting. And you don't get very far if you're doing it with judgment. If you do it with compassion and curiosity, it's a different ball game altogether. You allow yourself room to expand.
mm,
So I would say that self-awareness, like switching on, noticing yourself, is probably the first step towards getting to that place of self-trust. And for me, I think like a big part for me, a big step forward, bearing in mind that all of this stuff, I get very excited talking about this stuff because I love it. And I wish that I could just bottle this up and gift it to people. But everybody has to find their own path, right? So I'm talking about this from my own perspective purely. And everybody else has a different experience. But for me, one of the biggest moments was that realization that you don't have to look outside of yourself. You do have a choice to look within. You don't have to go along with what everybody else says that you should do. And I think what I find really interesting, and you've said it a couple of times, when you said that people that see the world differently, and my brain instantly goes, differently to what? So I made an assumption that you were talking about sort of like a neurotypical kind of perspective on the world.
it's partly true, but it's also true for people from different cultures. It's a culture, there's a fundamental different way of, however you arrive at fundamentally seeing the arrangement of the world slightly differently. I think there's quite a lot in common with the experience, regardless of how it arises. So it's what it is it's just seeing the world from a different angle, however that comes about. That's because most people see most of the world from mostly the same angle or very similar angle. Certainly, or in a given culture, they do. There is a when you're at the extra, when you're at the edges of that, there's a real value to that. You can contribute a huge amount, but there's also a real challenge to that. And I think I really like, and you can be overwhelmed just by the amount of the other perspective being pushed. It's like it's the default. It's always there.
Well, I think the reason I was asking is because when you said they see it differently, and then you said most people in a culture will see the world from the same angle. But do they though? How can we know? I think that, and also, what is that? Is that because they've chosen to, or is it constructed? Is it a constructed view of the world that they're sort of complying with? And who constructed it?
I think when it emerges, I think it's this idea, and these things are emergent. And that's a really important point. There isn't a fixed ultimate right answer. I don't believe there is. And yet the kind of the assumption underlying an awful lot of this, like really deep, is that there is, and someone has it. Is we're looking for a right answer. We're looking for a point, what's going to point us to the right thing.
Mm.
And that's all relative. It's all about who we are now and what's going on for us at the moment, and who we are as an individual, and what we want and what we need. And that, I think, moving in that direction, allowing ourselves that freedom to be, okay, it is different. I can think differently, because that is punished, over and over. It's like, it's not rewarded through a lot of school, a lot of work, and socially as well, sometimes. So it's not that everyone sees the world exactly the same, but it's that most people within a space, see the world mostly the same. And it's that kind of force of numbers thing, if we're out to the edge, that's, and everyone will have this to some degree, because I don't think anyone sees the world like right from the average point. But for those of us who are really significantly outside of those, that kind of right in the middle of that bell curve, it's a different experience. And I think, recognizing and reclaiming our own relationship with how we are perceiving the world, how we are perceiving, like, and finding pleasure in it, joy, play, is so important in doing that kind of thing. So I think that for me is that's as a way of doing that, and finding other people, finding spaces where you are really welcomed for being you, as fully you as you can be, accepting that that's never a finished thing either, and not just tolerated but welcomed. And that experience, so when you go out into spaces where that might not be true, you've got you've got different beliefs, you've got a counterexample, you've got something to take with you, and then you've got a space to go back to if you encounter harm, conflict, and difficulty as well, because you might well do, coming from a different perspective. So I think for me, that's the message to kind of the whole thing, and that's okay. It's okay to be in, to share a different perspective with a smaller group of other people.
It's funny that you talked about play, because I came up with a beautiful line that I think really summarizes my gorgeous women's community. And it's not about playing it safe. It's about finding a safe place to play. Because ultimately what happens when we do that is we are given room to expand into our full selves, because we are seen, we are beautifully accepted, like you said, not just tolerated. The space is made for us, and we feel like we can like fill out into that full self. And then when we've done that in that space that feels safe, like our confidence builds, right? And our self-belief builds, and all of that lovely stuff that is at the core of our power, that we need to be able to go and stand in those situations and say, no, actually, this is my perspective. I understand that's your perspective. I'd love to have a conversation with you about it. So it's not like, coming back to what you said earlier, it's not about taking on people's perspectives. And I completely understand why that has happened, because when you go through life with a certain environmental situation, with a certain set of word, with the neurodiversity, because I know that with ADHD and autism, there's an awful lot of misunderstanding as you're growing up, not feeling seen or heard, and not having the right kind of conversations with family and parents and peers and things like that to enable you to really fully be yourself. So I completely understand why that happens. But I would love to work with people to be able to get them to that place where they can stand in their power and say, this is my perspective. I'm willing to hear yours, but it's not that's your truth. This is my truth. They are separate. Let's have a conversation and see if we can expand each other's perspective. That feels beautiful to me. And I think that's how we change the world, right? Is one conversation at a time by expanding each other's perspectives.
Yeah, and I think if we, for people who find that daunting in the wider world, it is about finding a space. I use the safe enough space. That's my preferred model of this.
Yeah,
Is that because it is consequential, but we want a space where it's like where we can make mistakes and where we can like, and that's okay too. It's not yeah, not a space where we can't make mistakes. Because like a space where we can't make mistakes because they're kind of structurally not allowed doesn't teach us anything. Yeah. And a space where we can't make mistakes because their consequences are overwhelming means it's not okay. We can't, there's too much at risk. So it's a bit of, we want some degree of space and finding those spaces for us and trusting our own, not worrying about the external stuff so much as how it makes us feel. The experiencing, finding other people who experience the world like we do, whatever that means, and in whatever context we're talking about.
Sorry, you've just given me a light bulb moment when you said it. When you said about it not being about the external consequences. So essentially, what happens if you're in those spaces where it's not safe to make mistakes for external reasons, consequences, all of that stuff, then that's like deeply unsafe. If you're in a space where it does feel safe to make mistakes, you're not focusing on the external consequences. You do get to focus on the internal feelings of it. And you don't have space to do that over here in this other place. That's wonderful, Matthew. I'm having that. I'm sharing that with my gang.
Yeah, no, that's fab. And I think that's a really good place to kind of bring us to the end, really, and think about, because I think that, your trust, finding places where your experiencing of the world is welcome and you can develop it and play with it and explore the edges of that experiencing. That feels like such a huge thing, and doing that in community has been such a primary way of doing this. Yeah. So we've got your the community, the link to the community in the show notes, but do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Just to say that it's a space for you if you have a level of conscious awareness that enables you to sort of self-regulate to some extent, because one of my biggest bugbears, and I will make space for it, but it's not something that I want to be around on a daily basis, is people who can't, not at that point yet to self-regulate, that they still need to do a bit of work. So it's not a space for people that want to gossip about other people. It's not a space for people that want to come and rant and moan about things that are going wrong for them. It's a space for people who are forward thinking, for people who are happy to be vulnerable and to share themselves, or not necessarily happy to, but they feel safe enough in the space to share that deeper sort of shadow side to them, the stuff that is the real gold, actually. It's the stuff that you can really alchemize. You can take the traumas that you've experienced, the pain that you've gone through, and you can talk about it, and you can share it, and you can feel into it, and you can release it. So Affinity is a beautiful space, really, for women who are at that point in their life, in their business, where they're ready to do the work. They're not there yet, like I said, they're there. We're all on a journey of growth, but they are open to that. But it is a business space at the end of the day. So it's women business owners that is, the group. But they are there because they want to make mistakes. They want to come and explore themselves. They want to experiment and play and, just sort of toy with their marketing messages and how they show up on social media and know that they can do whatever they need to in their space to, really fully expand into themselves.
Super. Thank you so much. There's also a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you directly, I guess they can connect with you or follow you.
Absolutely. I always have a chat, as you can probably tell.
Excellent. And we mentioned a couple of books. I think it was you mentioned Women Who Run with the Wolves,
Yeah.
and The Persuaders.
Yes.
There was also, before the show we chatted, and there's also a book called Untamed that you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Which is like I feel like it's my personal self-help book, and I pretty much recommend it to everybody that I meet, because Glennon Doyle she's experienced so much trauma and has grown through it. And that's so inspiring for me that people are able to grow through and find real positives in the experiences that they've had. And I really do believe that is possible when we have the right support and the right approach. So yeah, that one of my favorite quotes from that is when she talks about how when people say to you, "God, you're so full of yourself," like it's an insult, like it's a really bad thing. And her response to it is, "Well, yeah, of course I am. If I'm not full of myself, what else is in there?" So it's a great quote, one of my favorites. And I think it's a really good, like, playful way to bring your awareness to your whole self and to explore what else is in there. Am I just like 70% trauma walking around and 30% me just squeezed into the rest? Can I let go of that 70% so I can expand fully into my whole self? So yeah, I'd highly recommend reading that book. It's fabulous.
Super. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting conversation. And I feel like we've gone slightly over time anyway, but I could have carried on for a long time. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah.
It's been fabulous. And I've got to say, I very much enjoy the very gentle way that you challenged my perspectives. Very gentle. It was so beautifully done. I did notice it and it felt really good, because I love to have my perspective challenged. I think it's important. So thank you.
Super. Thank you. And thank you for that. I like that kind of curiosity, and it's such an important thing for me. So that's really, really means a lot. Thank you. And yeah, thank you so much in the audience for watching as well. I hope it really got you thinking about stuff. And if it did, yeah, reach out and ask, and check out Lauren's community, check out and all of that stuff. There are past episodes of the show available on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can also find us on, by searching for Delightful Dissent on whatever podcast platform you happen to like. And if it's not there when you search, then let me know and I'll add it, because they're all weirdly disconnected. But anyway, yeah, and we are slowly working through the back catalogue of episodes, so they are still a little bit behind, but they're a little bit more up to date than they were last time. And yeah, the next episode is we're going to be talking to Johnny Prest, who is a creative strategist and change agent, and we're going to be talking about the idea of sustainable business. And this is like for me, avoiding the worst of a climate catastrophe feels so urgent, particularly as we're recording this in the middle of yet another weird record-breaking heat wave. And it's like, but I'm really not sure that a lot of what we call sustainability and a lot of what business is doing is actually helping. And so I think it's a really, really interesting one. Talk about challenging signs and, different perspectives. And yeah, this is a really, really interesting one. So, it sounds quite heavy, but having spoken to Johnny, I think it's going to be much more playful and kind of positive and looking to opportunities than perhaps it might sound. So yeah, that's going to be live at 1 p.m. UK time on Thursday, the 29th of June. So I very much hope to see you then. But in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.